Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy Halloween disappearances. All began with a party that should have been fun and ended with a mystery no one could explain. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now, let's start. It was on this farm property near Cragstone Lake, not far from Hembry, a spot that's usually rented out for hay rides and wedding barns during the fall. Fallon found the event on some sketchy local forum she followed. I think the post was called something like The Last Harvest Bash, and it claimed to be the biggest Halloween party south of Kingston. She was persistent, begged me to go, said she didn't want to show up alone, said I owed her for that time she came to my co-worker's birthday party and pretended to be my girlfriend so my ex would leave me alone. She wasn't above guilt-tripping me, but to be fair, she was usually right. Fallon had instincts for this kind of thing. If she said a party was worth it, it usually was. We'd always been close. Closer than most cousins. We grew up 2 blocks apart, went to the same schools, same weird church camp one summer, even worked together at a movie theater for a couple years. That night, she wore a full plague doctor costume. I'm talking full-on cloak, black gloves, and this antique-style mask with the curved beak. It looked like something stolen from an old medical exhibit, too detailed to be store-bought. She found it on Etsy from some seller in Prague, and she'd been showing it off for weeks. When she put it on, it didn't look like a costume. It looked like something that belonged to her. I went lazy with my costume, just grabbed one of those cheap skeleton bodysuits from Spirit Halloween and called it done. Fallon gave me crap for it, but she was used to me phoning it in. By the time we got there, the road was already packed with cars. Dirt shoulders were full. A few trucks had parked way out by the cornfield, and some people were sitting on tailgates, drinking beer from coolers and blasting music from portable speakers. The kind of place that didn't have rules, just vague warnings. The setup was simple. There were 3 main structures on the property. One was the party barn, huge, open-beamed, with fog machines puffing out smoke from the upper windows and black lights lining the rafters. Music was already thumping when we arrived. Next to it was a smaller feed barn, taped off with black and yellow, no entry signs that looked like they'd been reused from some old construction site. The third was a shed with food paper trays of pulled pork sandwiches, plastic cups of cider, both regular and spiked. People were clustered everywhere, in every state of costume, from full werewolves to half-assed name-tag puns. The main barn was chaos. Easily 200 people packed inside, bouncing to bass that rattled the floorboards, drinks spilling, costumes clashing. Everyone was filming everything. Fallon dove into it like she'd been waiting her whole life. I tried to match her energy at first, danced with her for a while, laughed, let myself get shoved through a few sweaty circles of people I didn't know. But maybe an hour in, I started to feel off. There was this pressure building behind my eyes, like the kind you get right before a migraine hits. It wasn't even the music, just this weird, low throb in my head that turned into nausea. I told Fallon I needed air and stepped out toward the bonfire. She followed me for a bit, still twirling her cloak like she was in some kind of stage play. Then she pointed over to the feed barn, the one with the warning tape, and said she heard there was a smaller group sneaking inside. Something about ghost stories, dares, and homemade vodka shots. She asked if I wanted to come. I told her no. Said I needed a few minutes to feel normal again. She gave me this goofy little bow, like she was accepting an award, and melted back into the crowd. I remember the firelight catching the lenses of her mask, just for a second, as she disappeared behind a bunch of cowboys and blood-drenched prom queens. That was the last time I saw her. I wasn't worried right away. Fallon did this sometimes. She'd vanish into parties, find someone interesting, and reappear with stories and 3 new Instagram followers. I sat by the fire, watching people toss candy into the flames like it was some kind of ritual. One guy threw in a whole Tootsie Roll bag and screamed like he was summoning Satan. Typical party nonsense. Every so often I checked my phone. No texts, no signal. Wasn't that unusual out here, but still annoying. About 40 minutes passed before I started asking around. I figured maybe she was off taking pictures. Fallon was obsessed with getting the perfect candid. She called it evidence of life. She'd post these shots of people mid-laugh or caught in weird poses, and they always looked like moments from a movie. But no one had seen her. I checked by the cider shed, near the bathroom line, along the dance floor. Nothing. I went back into the barn, searched every corner. The hayloft. The back hallway with those fake gravestones taped to the wall. Even peeked behind the DJ setup. Still nothing. There was someone in a plague doctor costume, but it was a short guy with neon shoelaces and a clearly plastic mask. Definitely not Fallon. I went back to the fire. Started scanning every group. A girl in a red devil onesie handed me a cup of spiked cider. I asked her if she'd seen Fallon, the bird mask girl. She blinked, like she had to think about it. Then she said, "Didn't she leave already?" I shook my head. She looked over at her friend and said, "I swear I saw her walking toward the woods, like maybe half an hour ago, alone." The woods weren't part of the party. Behind the barns, there was a path leading downhill, toward the lake. It was marked off with fresh caution tape and a private property sign, the kind you order online in bulk. That's where the girl pointed. I walked over. The tape was broken, not torn, cleanly snapped, like someone had unclipped it. I stepped past it and started down the trail. Every few steps I called her name. The farther I went, the quieter it got. The music faded completely. All I could hear was the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of something high in the trees. 5 minutes in, I found it. The plague doctor mask, lying in the middle of the trail, face down, strap intact. No scuffs, no dirt, just placed there. I picked it up, flipped it over. It looked exactly like the one Fallon wore. Even had that tiny scratch on the right lens where she dropped it once on concrete. I called her name again. Then something moved in the brush to my left, not footsteps, just rustling. I spun with my phone light raised. Nothing, just trees. Stillness. I took a step back. Then I heard it, right behind me. A whisper, one word, "Don't." I turned fast, nearly dropping the mask. No one there. Just silence. I clutched the mask and ran. Branches whipped at my arms. I didn't care. I didn't stop until I hit the clearing again. When I looked down, my hands were empty. The mask was gone, not dropped, just gone. I went straight to one of the event organizers and told them someone was missing. He looked annoyed, said the woods were taped off for a reason, said people signed waivers. Eventually, someone called the sheriff. They brought dogs, flashlights, spent hours combing the area. They found nothing. No footprints past the mask, no fabric on branches, no signs anyone had walked that trail besides me. Her phone never turned back on. Her car stayed in the lot until it was towed. No photos from that night, none on her phone, none from other people. The only usable footage was from the parking lot camera. It caught us arriving. After that, Fallon's digital presence just ended. The report was filed. Flyers went up. Posts got shared. But there was nothing. The farm sold the following spring. The new owners put up a real fence around the woods. Metal bolted signs that say, "No entry. Violators will be prosecuted." I was 24 that Halloween. My cousin Lena lived up in this quiet Vermont town. That night, she hosted one of her famous Halloween parties. I drove up from Cambridge with Ryan, my best friend since undergrad. He had this grin the whole ride, bouncing his leg, half laughing every time a ghost story came up on the radio. He loved stuff like that, ghost tours, corn mazes, horror movies. He once drove 3 hours just to visit a supposedly haunted bridge. We hit Lena's driveway around 8. It was already packed. Cars parked along the grass and even down the road. Her house was glowing orange string lights looped around the porch, fake cobwebs in the windows, music thudding from inside. The kind of scene where it's instantly obvious the party's already in full swing. Lena met us at the porch. She wore this long white dress, old-fashioned, torn in all the right places, face painted pale with black under her eyes. She looked like a dead bride from a forgotten century. I remember she had this fake blood dripping from the corner of her mouth and a lace veil half covering one eye. She hugged me, then looked past me at Ryan. "I made the best maze yet," she said, beaming. "No one's made it all the way through without turning back." Ryan was already excited. He said something like, "Challenge accepted," and shot me a look that said he'd be disappearing into that thing the second he could. The yard was chaos in the best way. Costumed people laughing around the bonfire. Someone bobbing for apples under the flickering lights. A couple people slow dancing to a remix of some creepy Halloween song. The barn was lit up, 2 walls covered in fake limbs. Dry ice spilling fog onto the floor. A motion sensor ghost projection that flickered and groaned every few seconds. Ryan leaned in close. "I'm going in," he said, already backing away, pointing toward the far edge of the yard where the maze entrance was. "You're not even going to get a drink first?" He just laughed and walked off into the dark, waving one hand over his shoulder. I stayed behind to help Lena. She was still fussing with the cider, trying to get the spout on the big glass jug to stop leaking, and messing with the speaker settings. Her wireless mic kept cutting out. She kept muttering about someone accidentally tripping a cord, or maybe the house just messing with her. The place did have that energy. Always a little too quiet in the corners, a little too cold near the back rooms. But I wasn't thinking about any of that yet. 10 minutes passed, then 20. People came and went. A guy in a werewolf mask asked where the bathroom was. I handed out a tray of caramel popcorn. I checked my phone, no messages from Ryan. I figured maybe he was just deep in the maze, or flirting with someone behind the barn. He did that, vanished mid-party, popped up later with glitter on his face and some wild story. But by the time it hit the half-hour mark, I started feeling it. That twist in your stomach when something's off and you can't explain why yet. I asked Lena if she'd seen him. She shook her head. "He probably got lost in the maze. It's bigger than last year. You know how he is." "Yeah, I did. But Ryan texted if he was running late. He posted selfies if he was goofing around." I walked toward the maze entrance. It started behind a cluster of trees, just far enough from the house to feel cut off. She'd hung these lanterns from wooden stakes to mark the way. The walls were made of stacked corn stalks, heavy netting, and black tarp. Some of it sagging a little in the breeze, giving the whole thing a weird, breathing look. I stepped in and called, "Ryan? You in here?" Nothing. Just my own voice bouncing off plastic and stalks. The path wound tightly, with sharp turns that made you double back or second guess where you just come from. She'd built it like a puzzle, with narrow corridors and dead ends blocked by fake bodies or blinking lights. At one fork, I paused. Left or right? I chose left. It got darker, more turns. A fake coffin with a speaker moaning inside. One spot had a strobe light going, making everything pulse in jerky flashes. Then I saw it. A part of the tarp wall was sagging like someone had shoved through it. The mesh netting next to it was torn, not neatly either. Jagged edges, frayed threads, like something had ripped it open. I stepped closer. There was a clearing past the flap, about the size of a small room. Meant to be one of the maze's scare zones. A prop skeleton hung from the center, rattling slightly on its hook. A speaker near its feet played low, scratchy groans. But the ground caught my attention. The dirt looked fresh, not planted or flattened, disturbed, and there were footprints, small, bare, toes visible in the soft earth. No shoes, narrow heel. They led away from the clearing, deeper into the corn, but no prints coming back. I followed the trail a few steps, but it just stopped. No drag marks, no scuffs, just ended. I stood there, flashlight sweeping over stalks, half expecting Ryan to jump out laughing. But nothing moved. I backed out faster than I'd meant to, nearly tripping on a plastic limb. I checked the rest of the maze, moving quicker now, calling his name louder, voice catching once or twice. Still no answer. Back at the bonfire, I found Jillian. She painted her whole face like a skeleton, glitter around the eyes. Asked if she'd seen Ryan. She hadn't. Someone nearby thought they saw him heading toward the barn. That was it. Lena found me pacing and told me again he was probably playing a prank. He knows the layout. Maybe he found one of the staff exits. Maybe he's watching you freak out right now. I wanted to believe her, but my chest felt too tight for that. By 11, the music was off. Most of the guests had started whispering. A few offered to help look. We searched every building. The barn, the shed, even the space under the porch where Lena stored wood. Nothing. I went back into the maze with a flashlight this time. The flap was gone, the whole tarp section gone, like someone had rolled it up and carried it off. In the clearing, I found something new. A black glove. Thin leather. A small tear near the seam. I held it in the light and just knew it was Ryan's. He'd worn them as part of his costume, a magician or vampire or something dramatic like that. I pocketed it and kept going, deeper into the corn. No wind, but the stalks moved now and then, just slightly. I found another broken stalk, bent at a sharp angle, crushed at the base like someone had stepped on it hard. I pushed through and found nothing, just a tree line. No more lights, no more maze. I called again, waited. The silence felt too thick somehow, like the night was listening. I walked back clumsy this time, tripping over roots and uneven ground. When I got to the porch, Lena was already calling the police. The deputies showed up with SUVs and spotlights, walked the maze with us, saw the same things I had, confirmed the footprints, the glove, the tear in the netting, brought dogs. They sniffed around and followed the scent to that same spot near the clearing, then nothing. No trail, no scent. Like he'd stepped into the air. They gave us flashlights, suggested we wait for daylight, offered to set up a search perimeter. Then they left. Lena gave me the guest room. I didn't sleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece it all together. In the morning, we walked the whole property, the back field, the pond, the edge of the woods. Still nothing. The guests were gone by then. Some had left in the middle of the night. Others just avoided eye contact when they passed me. One guy laughed nervously and said, "Hell of a Halloween stunt." I didn't respond. In the weeks that followed, the police came back. They brought drones, mapped the fields, checked nearby houses. No one had seen Ryan. His car was still behind the barn. His phone was inside on the chair by the fireplace. Wallet beside it. Lena couldn't stop replaying everything. She hired a private investigator, some guy with equipment and tracking dogs of his own. He found nothing, said it was like the land swallowed him. There was this Halloween party 2 doors down from my place, across the street from that empty lot with the rusted swing set and the broken fence no one ever fixed. I'd lived in that neighborhood outside of Marlow, Oregon, since I was 6. My parents bought the house back when it was still mostly families and retirees, but I didn't really know the people hosting that party. There were a younger couple, maybe late 20s, moved in that summer, always waved if we passed on the sidewalk, but I never caught their names until the night of the party. They introduced themselves as Colin and Marissa. That was the first time I'd actually spoken to them. A week before Halloween, these orange envelopes showed up in all the mailboxes on the street. No stamp, no return address, just tucked in like a personal invite. Handwritten in black ink, costumes required. No phones. Fun starts at 8. No RSVP info. No house number. Just that. Danny thought it was hilarious. She held the note up like it was a treasure map and said, "We are absolutely going to this." She'd been planning her costume since August. Plague doctor. The whole looked black velvet cloak, bird beak mask with tinted lenses, elbow-length gloves with bony fingers stitched into the fabric. She even added these thin metal rings to her fingers so they clicked when she moved them. I went with a skeleton hoodie and some smudged face paint. She looked me over, deadpan, and said, "You look like the spirit of minimum effort." We got to the house a little after 8. There were a few other people arriving at the same time, and right away something felt weird. The house was small from the street, single story, kind of run down, but inside, it looked huge. The front room opened into this long hallway with red bulbs instead of normal lights, dark wood flooring, and a fog machine that pumped out mist across the floor. There were cobwebs in the corners and weird little paper dolls hanging from the ceiling like ornaments. The air smelled faintly like cloves and something sour, like vinegar. No music though. Just soft conversations, occasional laughter. Everyone was in costume. Some were ridiculous. I saw a guy in full knight armor trying to maneuver around without knocking over a lamp. Another person was dressed like a jukebox. Others had simple masks or capes. But none of them had phones out. I didn't think much of it at first, figured people were just getting into the theme. The hosts greeted us at the door. Colin was dressed like a ringmaster, red jacket, tall hat, white gloves. Marissa was a marionette, with painted joints and strings hanging from her sleeves like she was being held up by something above her. Both of them had solid black contacts in. They smiled a lot, didn't say much. Just nodded, let people in, handed out drinks. Danny stayed close for the first half hour or so. We made small talk with a couple dressed like twin wizards, matching blue robes and sparkly hats. We wandered into the kitchen, picked up these little green gelatin shots that I'm 90% sure had absinthe in them. Then she looked at me, leaned in close and whispered, "Let's see what's down the hall." She loved stuff like that. Creepy rooms, weird houses, haunted attractions. We walked past several doors. Most were closed. One was slightly open, and when we peeked inside, it was a little den, wall-to-wall shelves filled with old porcelain dolls, cracked faces, dusty glass eyes. Black and white portraits hung between the shelves, all of people in masks, some elegant, some grotesque. Danny turned to me and grinned under her mask. "This is so creepy," she said. Then she stepped inside. I followed her in, looked around. One of the photos showed a couple in wedding attire, except the bride had a goat's head mask, and the groom had no eyes. I turned to say something else, but she was gone. At first, I thought she'd ducked behind the door to scare me. I even said, "Okay, good one," and looked around the corners. Nothing. I went back out into the hall, checked both ends. The kitchen again, backyard. She wasn't anywhere. The backyard had filled up by then. More guests standing around a fake graveyard setup with a dry ice cauldron bubbling in the center. Some people were crouched around it, tossing in what looked like herbs. Still no Danny. I pulled out my phone and sent her a text. "Okay, you got me. Where'd you go?" No reply. I called, went straight to voicemail. Still not panicking, just mildly irritated. She loved pranks, especially on Halloween, but 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. I started walking faster, room to room, asking people if they'd seen someone in a plague doctor costume. Some gave me vague nods. A couple said, "She's with the others." When I asked what that meant, they either laughed or looked away. No one gave a straight answer. I found Colin leaning against the staircase railing and asked him directly if he'd seen her. He just shrugged and said, "Some people find their own way out." That meant absolutely nothing. I pushed past Marissa at the front door, but she stepped in front of me, smiling too wide, and asked, "Are you ready for the next part?" She said it like we were in the middle of a story I hadn't agreed to be part of. I left. Stood on the sidewalk outside the house for a while, trying to calm down. The street was quiet, normal. No signs of anything weird from the outside. I waited maybe 10 minutes. Then I went back in. And something had shifted. The music had started, not party music. No lyrics. Just this low, thudding rhythm, slow and echoing like someone walking in a tunnel. The lights were dimmer, the fog thicker, and the people, they looked the same, but different. Like the masks were tighter on their faces, or maybe not masks at all anymore. I called out for Danny. No one reacted. No one reacted. I went back to the den. The dolls were gone. Shelves were empty. The photos, still on the walls, but now the frames were blank. Just empty wood and glass. I headed for the stairs. The invite had said the second floor was off limits, but I didn't care anymore. I had to find her. As soon as I hit the second step, everything went silent. The music cut out. Even the fog machine sound vanished. Total silence. Upstairs hallway was narrow and lined with mirrors, but the reflections weren't right. One mirror showed me alone. The next showed Danny behind me, mask off, staring with these wide, terrified eyes. Another had nothing in it at all, just the hallway behind me, but I was still standing there, staring over my own shoulder like I knew someone was behind me. I opened the first door, a small room, bare, just a single wooden chair facing the wall. I backed out, next door locked. Third one opened onto a spiral staircase, going down, way more stairs than should have fit in a one-story house. The air was cold, dry, smelled like dust and old fabric. At the bottom was a narrow corridor lined with pegs. Dozens of costumes hung there, all plague doctor outfits, identical to Danny's. Some looked ancient, mildewed, moth-eaten. Others looked freshly worn. One of them still smelled like her. Same lavender perfume she always used. I ran, didn't think, just sprinted. Somehow I ended up outside. I don't remember how. Maybe I passed out. Maybe someone carried me. I was on the front lawn, sun just starting to rise. The house looked quiet. No lights, no fog, no music. I walked up to the door and knocked. Nothing. Looked through the windows. Completely empty. No furniture. No decorations. Like the party had never happened. I called Danny again, still straight to voicemail. I reported her missing that afternoon, filed a report, told the police everything. They looked into it, came back with nothing. The house, they said, was owned by some investment trust, had been empty for over a year. No record of any Colin or Marissa living there. No party registered. No one else reported anything. The neighbors, they said they didn't see anything unusual. Didn't remember a party. Didn't know who I was talking about. We were in southern Missouri for Halloween, way out in the Ozarks, where even the trees seemed like they're leaning in to listen. Felix found the cabin online. He kept saying the world was too loud and that this trip was going to be his reset button. There were 6 of us on the trip: Felix, me, Eli, Maren, Zoe, and Paul. Old college crew, the kind that drifts apart when real life picks up speed. We used to swear we'd always make time, but jobs and cities and relationships pulled us in different directions. Halloween gave us a reason to regroup. Felix gave us the destination. He drove up the night before the rest of us, loaded down with food, beer, and whatever weird extras he'd picked up to make things festive. He sent me one last text before his signal dropped. Cabin looks older than advertised. I assumed that meant cobwebs and uneven floors. But when I got there, it was more like the forest had started reclaiming the place. The trees pressed in close on all sides. The roof sagged, and the porch boards felt soft underfoot. The windows were that old, wavy kind of glass, none of them matching, like they'd been replaced one at a time over 100 years. The place smelled like iron and wet wood. Felix met me at the steps wearing this heavy wool coat he definitely didn't need, and holding this creepy wooden mask under his arm. He gave me that grin he always had when he was about to talk you into something ridiculous. Said he found the mask in some thrift store in Maine. Might be cursed, might not be. That was just Felix. He liked walking the line between joke and dare. By late afternoon, everyone else had shown up. We settled in, unpacked the cars, and built a fire out back. The night started out easy. We passed around cheap beer, roasted whatever we could stab on sticks, and told stories from college that we used to swear we'd take to our graves. It felt good, natural. The kind of laughter that makes you forget how long it's been since you really laughed. Then the wind shifted. There was no build-up. It just snapped cold, like someone had turned the woods inside out. The fire didn't go out, but the heat didn't reach us anymore. Zoe made a joke about Ozark spirits, and Felix jumped right in, waving the mask around like it was a party prop. "Maybe they're here already," he said, and laughed a little too hard. By midnight, we'd migrated inside. The fire had burned down, and the cold was sinking in deeper than it should have. Zoe was scrolling through something on her phone she'd saved from earlier. A veil ritual, she called it. Something about Halloween being the thinnest point between this world and the next. The idea was, you light 6 candles, sit in a circle, close your eyes, and try to speak to whatever's on the other side. She pitched it like a game. Something spooky, harmless, like playing with a Ouija board when you're bored and tipsy. Felix was the first to agree. He was already lighting candles before anyone said yes. He pulled the mask out again and said he wanted to lead it. That part made me hesitate. Something about the way he held it, not playful anymore. It felt heavier. Still, everyone else was into it, and I didn't want to be the buzzkill. We moved the table to clear some space on the cabin floor, 6 candles in a loose circle. 6 people sitting cross-legged in flickering light. The floorboards creaked under us like they were listening too. Felix struck matches one by one, lighting each candle. With every flame, he whispered something under his breath. I couldn't catch the words. It wasn't English. And it didn't sound like anything you'd hear in a church or a horror movie. It had this raw, splintered sound, like the syllables were made for wood, not mouths. As soon as the last candle was lit, the shadows on the walls shifted. The room felt colder, darker, even with the candlelight. And then all 6 flames leaned sideways, every single one of them tilting toward Felix. No draft, no breeze, just that eerie, perfect alignment. He slipped the mask on, just for a second, and when he took it off, his nose was bleeding. Thin, steady. He wiped it with the back of his hand like it was nothing. You're not supposed to look, he said low. Then he laughed, but it was all wrong tight, breathless, like it hurt to push it out. Nobody said a word for a long beat. Then Paul clapped his hands once, trying to break the tension, and mumbled something about the ritual being over. We all nodded, blew out the candles, and acted like we were cool. But something had changed. The room felt heavier after that, like the air had grown thick with static and regret. Around 12:30, Felix stood up and said he was going to the outhouse. Grabbed his flashlight. No one offered to go with him. We just watched the beam disappear between the trees. That was the last time any of us saw him. At first, nobody panicked. We figured maybe he needed a minute. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Paul laughed and said maybe Felix was trying to spook us, that he was probably crouched behind the woodpile waiting to jump out and scream. I went out with Eli to check. We walked the path. The outhouse door was open, swaying. The light was still on inside, empty. No footprints leaving in any direction, just ours. We called his name until our voices cracked. The woods didn't echo. They just swallowed everything we said. We searched every inch of the property. The shed, the fire pit, the creek that ran behind the cabin. Nothing. When we came back inside, I noticed the mask was missing. It had been next to the candle stubs. I asked if anyone moved it. Everyone swore they hadn't touched it. Zoe looked pale, said she remembered it being there when Felix left. We tore the place apart looking for it. It was gone. At dawn, I hiked out until I got one shaky bar and called the sheriff. He showed up a few hours later with 2 deputies and a pair of search dogs. They scoured the area for over 12 hours. Not a single trace of him, not a thread of clothing, not a drop of blood, just disturbed leaves that stopped cold near the outhouse. One of the deputies said quietly, "It's like he just stepped out of the world." They filed the report. We answered every question they threw at us. That night, Eli and I stayed behind. We didn't talk much, just sat near the fireplace with our backs to the wall, staring at the door, half expecting him to walk in and call us suckers. He didn't. 3 days later, the sheriff called me, said they found something by the creek, half buried in the mud, a piece of carved wood. I drove back out. It was the mask, but it looked wrong, like it had been twisted from the inside. The wood was darker, almost charred. The lines deeper, stretched like something had tried to climb out of it. They sealed it in an evidence bag and took it with them. A week later, the sheriff called again. The mask was gone. Vanished from the evidence locker. No break-in, no records, just gone. Time moved on. Time moved on. I tried to convince myself it was an accident, that Felix got lost, that the search just missed something, that he'd show up one day with some insane story about survival and bad decisions. I moved to Kansas City, started a new job. Everin was my brother. Not technically, we weren't related by blood, but we grew up next door to each other in this little Arizona town just outside of Flagstaff, and by the time we were in kindergarten, people stopped asking if we were friends and just assumed we were brothers. We basically lived at each other's houses. If one of us was there, the other wasn't far behind. We had that kind of bond where we could go weeks without hanging out and then pick back up like no time had passed. But honestly, we didn't go weeks without hanging out. We were always around. Every Halloween, though, that's when Everin really came alive. He didn't just enjoy Halloween. He treated it like an annual project. Like some people put up a couple of plastic skeletons or a jack-o'-lantern. Everin turned his entire front yard into a horror attraction. I mean it. One year, he built a guillotine that dropped an old CPR dummy head into a basket. The year after that, he mounted half a mannequin into a wheelbarrow full of fake guts and recorded himself screaming into a mic so it would loop when people walked by. And don't even get me started on the fog machines. He repurposed an old dehumidifier from his garage one year and figured out how to make it hiss fog through the vents in timed bursts. It was like walking into a crime scene if the crime was theatrical and extremely committed. So when his cousin, Mateo, decided to throw a huge Halloween party out in the desert, nobody was surprised when Everin went full production mode. He told me 2 weeks in advance he was planning something next level. He wouldn't tell me what, just kept saying, "You'll see." The night of the party, he walked out of his house wearing this full-body EMT outfit he'd pieced together from old surplus stores and thrift shops. On the back, he'd stenciled "Last Responder" in white paint. Told me it was morbid, but timely. That was classic Everin. He'd make a joke that was probably too soon, then double down on it, and somehow still make you laugh. I rolled my eyes and said it was ridiculous. He just grinned and said, "That's the point." We left around 9. I drove. It was one of those crystal clear nights that only happen in the desert. Cool air, full moon, stars so bright you'd swear someone dimmed the rest of the world just to highlight the sky. The house Mateo had rented was about 20 minutes out of town, squatting on this flat stretch of land where there was nothing but sagebrush, gravel, and silence in every direction. No lights from neighboring houses, no fences, just open desert and dark horizon. When we pulled up, Everin was already jittery. Not from nerves, more like a kid on Christmas. He kept tapping the side of his leg with one hand and saying things like, he said there's a scavenger hunt this year, and supposed to be a surprise at the end, something insane. Mateo had apparently promised actual prizes this time, not just candy or dumb party favors. Cash, something big enough to get people to take it seriously. I didn't totally buy into it, but Everin was sold. The party itself was what you'd expect. Music, cheap drinks, people in costumes ranging from half-assed to too committed. There were maybe 30 people there. Some I recognized from high school, some who had clearly driven in from out of town. Lots of masks, face paint, dollar store wigs. Fire pit in the middle of the lot. Fold-out tables with red plastic cups and bowls of popcorn. The usual. We hung around for a bit. Everin kept looking toward the back of the property like he was waiting for something. Then, right at 10, someone rang this old brass bell. Everyone sort of turned at once, like we were all keyed in for it. Mateo stood up on a crate and started passing out envelopes. Each one had a little wax seal on it like we were being inducted into some secret club. Everin tore his open before I'd even looked at mine. Inside was a small card with a riddle on it. Vague, almost annoyingly poetic. Mine said something like, "Where shadows point and wind forgets, dig where the silence quietly sets." I had no clue what it meant. Everin, though, he looked like he was about to go on a mission. "I'm winning this," he said, already walking backward into the dark, flashlight under his chin like he was telling a campfire story. "Try not to fall into a snake pit," I called after him. He gave me a 2-finger salute. And that was it. That was the last moment I saw him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone was out there for a while, flashlights bobbing through the brush, people calling out clues to each other, laughing when they realized they'd been going the wrong way. Phones weren't allowed. It was a rule. No GPS, no texting, no cheating. Just flashlights and instinct. 45 minutes went by. Then an hour. People started coming back, dirty and sweaty but in good spirits. Some had tiny prize bags, candy, mini liquor bottles, cash rolled up with rubber bands, typical stuff. But no Everin. I waited. Another 15 minutes, asked Mateo if he'd seen him. He just shook his head and said, probably still out there trying to scare someone. Which, yeah, fair. Everin once wore a clown mask under his real Halloween mask and waited 2 hours in a closet to freak out Mateo's girlfriend. But this felt different. I checked the car. His phone was still in the cup holder, no missed calls, no texts, just sitting there like he'd never even thought to bring it. People started leaving around midnight. By 1, it was just me, Mateo, and a couple of his friends. We walked the property with headlamps, calling Everin's name until our voices started going hoarse. I kept expecting to hear him shout boo or something, but the desert just swallowed the sound. There weren't even footprints, no dropped flashlight, no torn costume snagged on a bush, nothing. We called the cops around too. They actually responded pretty quickly. Helicopter went up right after sunrise. ATVs started combing the property. Search dogs, full grid sweep. They checked every square foot of land within a mile radius. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. They found one of the riddle cards wedged between 2 rocks, about a quarter-mile out. It wasn't Everin's, had someone else's name written across the bottom in black Sharpie. That person made it back fine. Said they'd dropped it chasing down the wrong clue. After 72 hours, the search effort scaled back. By the end of the week, it was officially closed. No signs of foul play. No signs of distress. No trail to follow. Just a blank space where Everin used to be. His parents stopped calling me after a while. Not because they blamed me, I don't think, but because I was the one who drove. The one who saw him walk off into the dark like it was nothing. I was 31 when Nika vanished at that Halloween party outside a town called Tannery Ridge. We both worked at the Larchfield Historical Archive, which sounds way more exciting than it actually is. The building was a converted carriage house, dusty, half-renovated, always either too hot or too cold, depending on how close you were to the West Wing radiators. Nico was in preservation. He loved the details. Tiny, obsessive stuff like the kind of string used to bind letters, or the way water damage bloomed across the corner of a document. He'd only been there about 6 months, but we clicked early. Same sense of humor, very dry, kind of weird. Same taste in old horror films where everything was just slightly off and no one ever really explained anything. We'd complain about the radiator sounds, which made these rhythmic banging noises that sometimes lined up perfectly with our footsteps and made it feel like something was mimicking us from the hallway. When I got the party invite from Caroline, I almost didn't mention it to him. It wasn't exactly his scene. Big old rented farmhouse, creative crowd, lots of drinks made with herbs people pretended to know the names of. But I figured I'd throw it out there. He looked up from the microscope, raised an eyebrow over his glasses, and said, deadpan, "Only if I can come as Vincent Price." And he meant it. He showed up at my place that night already in costume. Velvet coat, high collar, lace cravat, the works. He had this walking cane with the silver tip that looked like it could have belonged to someone's great-grandfather. Said he got it at an estate sale, and I honestly believed him. The mustache was done too well. It wasn't exaggerated or cartoonish. It was subtle, clean, and somehow made his face look sharper, like it wasn't a costume, like he was just remembering how to be someone else. We took my car, avoided the highway, and stuck to the back roads. Nothing but stretches of trees, long patches of fog rolling over the fields. The kind of drive where every mile marker looks the same and you start to feel like maybe you've gone too far, even if you haven't. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel drive, tucked between skeletal trees that barely moved in the wind. There were candles in the windows, but no music outside, no laughter. You couldn't hear the party until you were right up on the porch. Inside, there were about 40 people, most of them in costume, most already tipsy or pretending to be. Decorations were half-hearted in a charming way. Draped cobwebs, dented candy bowls, a single Bluetooth speaker wedged in a windowsill, playing music that skipped every so often like the file was corrupted. The air smelled like cider, sweat, and old floorboards. The second floor lights were out completely. Caroline said the breaker had been tripping and nobody felt like fixing it. The basement was locked, or at least it was when we arrived. Nico stepped inside like he'd already been there. People noticed him. That happens when you look like Vincent Price walked out of a film reel and into a party. One guy in a skeleton onesie gave him a dramatic bow. Someone in a shredded prom dress called him Count Velvet and offered him a drink that looked like swamp water. He smiled politely but didn't really engage. He was scanning the room, watching everything. He always did that. In the archive, he'd point out weird things none of us saw. Tiny tool marks, mismatched nail heads, documents that had been folded and unfolded in a way that didn't match their claimed age. It wasn't paranoia. He just noticed things. By around 10, we drifted apart. I got pulled into a conversation in the kitchen with some of Caroline's friends about a haunted doll museum someone claimed to have visited in Belgium. The last time I saw Nico, he was standing on the back deck, one hand on his cane, listening calmly to a guy in a gas mask rant about forgotten burial sites and ley lines. He wasn't laughing or nodding too much, just standing still, very upright, like he was anchoring himself to that exact spot. At 10:15, I realized he hadn't come back in. It wasn't a big deal. I assumed he was out for air or had wandered off with gas mask guy for a walk and talk. But after a few more minutes passed, I checked the fire pit. There were still a handful of people there, smoking, arguing over taro spreads, roasting marshmallows directly in the coals. I asked if anyone had seen Nico. One woman with glitter stuck to her hair said, "The Vincent Price guy?" "Yeah, he left with the plague doctor, maybe 10 minutes ago." Another guy chimed in. They were talking about bones, like real bones. He laughed. No one else did. I asked which direction they went, and she just gestured vaguely toward the tree line behind the shed. There was a path. Crude, uneven, marked with carved pumpkins glowing with little tea lights that barely held up in the wind. It felt like a haunted trail, but too quiet. No speakers, no props, just that strange hush that doesn't feel like night so much as absence. I followed it about 30 feet. Then the pumpkins stopped. No more lights, no more trail. Just wet grass, sloping ground, and tall trees that didn't seem to move. I called his name once. Nothing. The sound didn't even echo. It just died. I turned back, a little unsettled, but still thinking, okay, maybe they looped around the front or found a smoke spot. Inside, still no Nico. I checked the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom line. I texted him, "You good?" No reply. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. No ringtone, no delay, just a flat drop. I searched again, every room, upstairs and down. People started asking what I was looking for. When I said the guy dressed like Vincent Price, someone made a joke about him being offered to the forest. No one laughed. Upstairs was pitch black. I used my phone flashlight, poking around coats, beer cans, empty corners. Nothing. When I came back down, the basement door was hanging open, not wide, just enough. The padlock was off and lying on the floor. I pushed the door with 2 fingers. It creaked open slowly. No light inside, just this heavy smell like mold and cold dirt and something else I couldn't place, like dead plants or wet fabric. I held my phone out and stepped down. Each step creaked in a way that made me think of joints instead of wood. The basement was small. Dirt floor. Old shelves buckled under the weight of forgotten junk. Stacks of firewood that looked unused. And in the far corner, under a blue tarp barely covering it, I saw something silver. I moved closer. It was the cane, Nico's, resting at a slight angle like someone had dropped it mid-step and walked away without bending down. No footprints, no coat, no hat, just the cane. I backed up the stairs, heart hammering now. I closed the door and called the police. They got there around midnight, took my statement, brought dogs, searched the basement, the attic, the woods behind the house. Nothing. No Nico. No guy in a plague doctor mask. No signs of struggle. Just the cane and one new thing, a wine glass. Upstairs, placed neatly on the windowsill. It hadn't been there before. I know it hadn't. The host swore they didn't know Nico, said the invite was open, that no one had an actual list. No one remembered talking to him, just vague impressions. The guy in velvet, the spooky dude, I thought he was with someone else. The Halloween party that year was the one everyone at school wouldn't shut up about. It was out in New Hampshire, in this old barn someone's cousin had rented for the night. There were supposed to be lights, loud music, fog machines, maybe even a bonfire if nobody complained. It was the first real party since the lockdowns finally ended, so people were kind of losing their minds about it. But honestly, I only said yes because Marcus was going. He was my best friend. Not loud or flashy, just solid. Made school feel less like a daily punishment. The kind of guy who'd split his earbuds with you during a boring lecture or sneak off with you during lunch just to sit behind the gym and talk about nothing. He never tried to be like everyone else. So when he looked at me and said, "Come on, you'll actually enjoy this one," I gave in. We got a ride from his older brother Theo, who dropped us off at the end of a long dirt driveway. Cars were already lined up on both sides, all the way up to the barn. Even from the road, we could see the strobe lights inside flashing through the open doors and fog drifting out like smoke. It didn't look like a school party. It looked like something that probably should have been shut down an hour ago. Marcus had gone all out that year, full scarecrow. Like burlap mask, robe tied around his arms, bits of straw sticking out everywhere. He looked ridiculous in the best possible way. I had on a lazy skeleton hoodie and smudged some white face paint across my cheeks, bare minimum. When we stepped inside, it was instantly hot. Music was blasting, bass shaking the floor. People were dancing, shouting, just going full chaos. Someone had stuck fake tombstones in the corners and strung orange lights along the rafters. The fog made it impossible to see anyone clearly. Just flickers of faces and flashes of color moving past. Marcus was in his element. He drifted into different groups like he belonged with all of them. That was his thing, quiet when it was just us, but somehow magnetic in a crowd. I tried to stick with him, but somewhere between the lights and the music, I lost him. Figured I'd catch him on the next loop around. He always came back. But by 10:30 he still hadn't. I shot him a text. Nothing. Called him. Straight to voicemail. It was impossible to hear anything in there, so I stepped outside to get better signal. There was a big open field behind the barn. A smaller group had gathered around a makeshift fire pit. Just an old oil drum someone had filled with burning wood. I asked around if anyone had seen a guy in a scarecrow costume. One guy gave me a blank look and shrugged. A girl in a witch hat said she'd seen him head behind the barn with someone. When I asked who, she just shook her head, said she didn't recognize them. Said they were wearing a plain white mask, not even a costume, just blank white, no features. At first I laughed it off, sounded like a bad Halloween prank. But when I went around back, it was empty. The doors were still propped open, and I could smell hay coming from inside. The ground was still soft from the rain we'd had the day before, and under the dim floodlight, I saw them footprints. 2 sets heading straight for the tree line at the back of the property. One set was wide and deep, like boots. The other looked smaller, Marcus's size. I followed them a few steps before they started to fade into the grass. Then the boot prints, the bigger ones, just stopped. Like in the middle of the field, mid-stride, gone. But the smaller prints kept going. A few more yards. Then those stopped too. right next to a tree root where something was tangled. It was a rope, rough, frayed, twisted around the roots. Same kind of rope Marcus had wrapped around his arms for the costume. I pulled it loose and looked back at the barn. Everyone else was still inside, dancing like nothing was wrong. I tried his phone again. Still nothing. I texted, "Where are you?" A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. New message. It was from Marcus. Just one word, help, no punctuation, no follow-up. I texted back immediately, but got nothing. That's when my stomach really dropped. I aimed my flashlight toward the trees and started running. The beam wasn't great, barely lit up anything beyond a few yards, but it was enough to catch something half sunk in the mud. A boot, his boot, just sitting there, clean, laces still tied, not thrown, not yanked off, like it had been taken off carefully and placed down. I called his name, yelled it into the dark. No answer, no echo either. Just thick silence and cold fog. I turned back and ran fast, pushing through the barn doors. Inside, it was like nothing had changed. Music still pounding, people still partying. I found the guy who was supposed to be hosting and told him Marcus was missing. At first he laughed, said people wander off at parties all the time, but then I showed him the text. His face changed. He said he'd look around but told me not to call the cops yet. Didn't want to bring heat on the party. That was it for me. I walked back outside and dialed 911. The cops got there maybe 20 minutes later. By then, half the crowd had either left or claimed they didn't know anything. They talked to the people still hanging around. Nobody admitted to seeing Marcus leave, except one guy, tall, kinda twitchy, who swore he saw him talking to someone near the side entrance. Said the other guy had a white mask and a gray hoodie. Said he assumed it was a costume until he realized he'd seen the same person earlier, standing by the road when he first arrived. Said the guy didn't move, didn't talk to anyone, just stood there. When the cops searched the woods, they found what I found. The footprints, the rope, the single boot. Nothing else. No blood. No signs of a fight. No phone. Just mud and fog and dead ends. The next morning, it hit the local news. Teen missing after Halloween party. The usual stuff, foul play, not ruled out, ongoing investigation. That was the last time they gave any real update. A month later, it went quiet. 3 months in, they stopped calling it an investigation at all. After 6, no one talked about it anymore, except me, because the messages didn't stop. Every Halloween night, at exactly 10:32, my phone buzzes, always from an unknown number, always the same word, help. The police traced it once, said the signal came from somewhere near the old barn. They searched again, found nothing. Last year, I went back alone. The barn's completely abandoned now. Paint peeling, roof sinking in, windows boarded up. I parked at the end of the same dirt drive and waited. 10:32 hit, phone buzzed. The message came in, help. Then another one, a photo. It was dark, low quality, kind of grainy, looked like a still from a video. But I knew what I was seeing, the rope, that rough burlap texture. And in the background, barely visible, something smooth and white, featureless, a mask. This year I'm going back again. I'd gone all in that year, strung up orange lights along the porch, fake cobwebs in every corner, one of those inflatable pumpkins that won't stay upright in the wind. A plastic skeleton zip-tied to the railing, black streamers flapping in the breeze like someone waving you off. Total suburban haunted house vibes. And yeah, it was a little over the top, but there's something about Halloween that lets adults drop the dignity and just be ridiculous again. Maybe it's the sugar. Or maybe it's that everyone secretly likes being spooked when it feels safe. Anyway, most of the neighborhood showed up, families from both ends of the block, the couples next door, even a few of the college kids from the rental house on Ellery Lane. They came in half-baked costumes, cat ears and flannel shirts pretending to be werewolves. But they brought cider and helped with cleanup later, so no complaints. The Burns came too, which I wasn't sure they would. They'd been pretty quiet since moving in over the summer. They brought their son, Tyler. Tyler was 8, skinny little guy, all knees and elbows. He had this way of moving that made it look like he was never quite grounded, like his feet barely touched the floor, and his hair? A complete mess. Static cling champion of the neighborhood. It stuck up in every direction, like he was mid-shock at all times. He was completely obsessed with ghosts. I'd seen him carrying around library books with cartoon spirits on the covers. His mom told me once that he refused to go to bed unless his friendly ghost was watching from the corner. I figured it was just a phase, so when he showed up at my place that night in the classic white sheet with eye holes look, it made perfect sense. No blood, no props, just a plain white bed sheet hanging down to his shins, cut just right for his arms and head. He called it authentic, and I remember the way he said it, like the word meant something heavier than we gave it credit for. Everyone laughed, of course. It was funny in that kid who takes things too seriously kind of way. The evening went exactly how it should have. Pumpkin carving in the garage, complete with the usual mess of seeds and slippery strings clinging to every available surface. The front yard had bowls of candy every few feet, one perched on a folding table, another on a hay bale. Kids were bouncing between yards, laughing, screaming, comparing loot. It was loud, chaotic fun. I remember checking the time on my phone while refilling the cider. It was about 8:30. That's when the fog machine started up. At first I thought someone had hit the switch by accident. It was an old thing I'd found in a box of Halloween stuff left by the previous owners. I hadn't tested it yet because the cord was frayed, and honestly, I didn't think it even worked. But there it was, humming softly, spitting out fog across the porch like a dragon with asthma. I walked over to shut it down and realized the power cord was still unplugged, just sitting there, coiled neatly behind it, not even close to the outlet. The machine itself? No switch flipped, no lights on. Just a quiet, steady hiss and cold fog spilling down the steps. I unplugged it anyway, reflex I guess. Then I turned around. Tyler was at the edge of the yard, standing still, facing the woods. The tree line runs along the back of my property, maybe 100 feet of dense trees before it opens into an old walking trail that hasn't seen proper use in years, overgrown mostly. There's a fence back there too. Not tall, maybe 3 feet, just enough to mark the edge of things. He was just standing there, arms at his sides, sheet fluttering slightly in the breeze. No movement, no reaction to anyone behind him. I called his name once, nothing. No flinch, no turn of the head. Rachel, his mom, walked up beside me. He gets like this sometimes, she said with a small shrug. Zoning out. Lives in his own little world. We laughed, a little uneasy. Then someone bumped into me with a plate of cookies, and I turned for half a second. When I looked back, he was gone. I figured he'd gone inside, probably after more candy or to warm up. So I went in too, checked the kitchen. Nothing. Living room? Empty. The hallway where everyone had tossed their coats into a heap? No sign of him. I asked around. A few people said they hadn't seen him in a while. And just like that, the party stopped being a party. We started searching, casually at first, like it was just a game of hide and seek. Backyard, front porch, driveway. I walked around the side of the house, half expecting to see him crouched behind a bush, giggling. But after a few minutes, people got serious. You could feel the shift. Conversation stopped. Everyone started calling his name. Tyler, 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 over and over, voices bouncing off houses and trees like echoes in a canyon. After 10 minutes, someone said it, we should call the cops. It felt extreme. It always does, the first time you say it, but something was off, and everyone knew it. Officers showed up fast. Small town, they always do. The woods behind my house turned into a scene from a crime show. Flashlights sweeping through trees. Officers spaced out in a line. Dogs barking in the distance. One neighbor brought out their drone, trying to get a view from above. It didn't help. Then someone found Tyler's candy bucket. It was sitting by the fence. Full, not even opened yet. Still packed with the candy we'd handed out. Miniatures and gummies, wrapped and untouched. Which is just Wrong. No 8-year-old leaves a full candy bucket behind on Halloween. Not without something stopping them. About 20 feet into the woods, someone spotted the sheet, folded neatly at the base of a tree, like someone had smoothed it flat. No mud, no rips, no sign it had been dragged or dropped, just placed. No other signs. No footprints past the fence, no broken branches, no torn fabric caught on the underbrush. Nothing. The search continued until dawn. I stayed up all night. Rachel and Mitch sat in my living room for hours, silent. Officers came and went. People whispered. I remember sipping cold cider from a paper cup, watching shadows move across my own lawn like they didn't belong to anything. The Burns moved out less than a month later. I don't blame them. Their place is still empty. I still do Halloween every year. Still string up the lights. Still hang the skeleton from the porch railing. But never forget that incident. We'd found this rundown, slightly crooked 2-story rental just outside a little place called Coldbrook Falls, way up in upstate New York, where the street signs start to vanish and the trees lean in like they're curious. The house sat at the edge of that line. We found it on a sketchy rental site. The listing said, rustic charm. What that really meant was a sagging porch, windows that didn't quite seal, and a weird stain in the hallway we never fully identified. But it was cheap, and more importantly, it was perfect for a Halloween party. It was me and my friend Jude planning everything. We'd both grown up watching those low-budget horror flicks where teenagers wander into clearly haunted buildings and then start splitting up for no reason. This house looked like a set from one of those movies, so we leaned into it. Fake cobwebs everywhere, orange string lights across the stair railings, and this awful playlist full of horror movie sound effects that looped screams and chainsaws every few minutes. We didn't just decorate the house. We made it a whole thing. I found some beat-up speakers that still worked if you angled the cord just right. Jude rigged up a fog machine he'd borrowed from his cousin. Someone brought a strobe light that made the upstairs landing feel like a low-budget rave. We even filled jars with peeled grapes and cold spaghetti and labeled them with dumb stuff like witch eyes and goblin guts. It wasn't subtle, but it was fun. We invited pretty much everyone we knew. People from work, Jude's cousin's band, friends from college, even a couple neighbors who didn't really get Halloween but liked free drinks. By 10, the place was buzzing. People were in every room, sitting on the stairs, crowding around the kitchen island. Costumes everywhere. Vampires, clowns, a guy wrapped in actual duct tape who insisted he was the concept of regret. The house was loud. The floor felt like it might give in at any moment, and the fridge door refused to stay shut no matter how many beer cans we jammed inside. Then, sometime after 11, this guy walks in. He didn't knock, didn't make an entrance. He just sort of appeared. One minute I was refilling a bowl of pretzels, and the next I looked up and there he was, just inside the doorway. Tall, wearing layers like multiple coats, thick boots, the kind of thing you'd expect if someone got lost hiking in a snowstorm. But the weirdest part was the mask. It was this owl face, full of dark feathers, with a long, pale beak made of something that looked like carved bone. The eyes were just black holes. No mesh, no covering, just dark gaps. The whole thing looked handmade, but not in a fun arts and crafts way. It was crude, uneven, like someone stitched it together with whatever they had on hand. I laughed and said, "Nice mask, Garen." Jude barely glanced up from where he was fiddling with the speaker cables. "Yeah, that's my uncle." That caught me off guard. I'd never met Garen. Heard the name maybe once or twice in passing. Jude didn't talk about him much, just mentioned he lived out near the hill somewhere and mostly kept to himself. I had no idea he'd even been invited. But Jude didn't seem surprised he was there. So I figured, all right, maybe he just decided to show up last minute. Family, right? I tried to talk to him, asked where he got the mask, asked if he wanted a drink. He didn't answer. He just stood in the doorway for a second, head tilted slightly, and then started walking, slow and deliberate, like he was scanning everything. moved past the living room, didn't react when people tried to hand him candy or joke about his costume, just kept walking, hands deep in his coat pockets, turning his head every now and then like he was searching for something specific. By midnight, I realized I hadn't seen him in a while. I nudged Jude, who was trying to get someone's phone connected to the speaker. "Hey, where's your uncle?" Jude looked around like he hadn't noticed he was gone. "I think I saw him near the shed earlier," so we went outside. The backyard was still full of people, though things were starting to wind down. The fog machine had run out, and someone had unplugged the strobe lights after they started making a kid nauseous. A few people were gathered around the fire pit we'd barely managed to light with damp logs. Others were heading toward their cars, weaving slightly as they tried to say goodbye to everyone at once. We headed toward the shed. It sat at the back of the yard near the tree line, where the party lights didn't quite reach. We'd locked it earlier because the inside was full of junk old tools, rusted saw blades, a lawn chair with what looked like animal teeth embedded in the cushion. It gave off bad vibes even before the party, but now the padlock was hanging open. The door creaked as we pushed it inward. I called out, "Garen?" Nothing. We used our phones to light the inside. The shed smelled like wet plywood and old dirt. Something about the air in there felt heavier, like the room hadn't been opened in years, even though we'd been in it that morning. Then we saw the mask. It was lying on the floor in the back corner, half buried under a pile of wood shavings. The feathers were ruffled. The beak had a fresh crack running through it, like it had been dropped or hit against something. I picked it up. It was still warm. That's when I started to feel it. That shift in your stomach when something goes from weird to wrong. We searched the house again, top to bottom. Every closet, every room. Jude even climbed into the attic, ducking under cobwebs, calling his name. Nothing. His coat was still on the couch. His keys were sitting next to the punch bowl in the kitchen, but Garen was just gone. We asked around. Most people hadn't even realized he was there. A few vaguely remembered the mask. One guy swore he saw a tall figure walking toward the woods around midnight, but it was dark, and he admitted he might have just been seeing shadows. We stayed up the rest of the night, called his phone, straight to voicemail, walked the roads, yelling his name, stood at the edge of the trees, trying to convince ourselves he hadn't just wandered off into the woods, but every direction past that shed felt like it stretched on forever. At sunrise, we called the police. They showed up, took statements, checked the property. They asked the same questions over and over. Was he drinking? Was he on medication? Did he have a history of mental illness? Had he ever gone missing before? We didn't have answers. Neither did Jude. All we knew was that he walked into the house without a word and left without anyone noticing. The search dragged on for days. They brought in dogs, sent divers to a pond about a mile away, interviewed neighbors, even though most of them lived too far out to have seen anything. Nothing. No footprints past the backyard, no sightings, not even a trace of him on traffic cameras or roadside gas stations. It was like he stepped into the shed and never came out. Weeks went by. Flyers went up all over town. Jude's family hired a private investigator who found absolutely nothing. The cops stopped checking in as often. That Halloween, Mayak got invited to a party in Salem. One of those friend of a friend invites with barely any details and no real host name. I should have questioned it more, but I didn't. We left around 4 in the afternoon and drove from upstate into Massachusetts. The drive itself was forgettable, just overcast skies and endless roads lined with leafless trees. It had that damp October smell, the kind you only get when leaves have been sitting in the gutter too long, mixed with chimney smoke and something vaguely sweet in the air. Micah kept repeating that it was a threshold thing. I asked him what that meant, and he just smiled like it was some inside joke I wasn't in on yet. We pulled into Salem close to 9. Chestnut Street was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. It was a Saturday night on Halloween, and we barely saw anyone walking around. Just a few closed storefronts and a string of dim streetlights. Then we saw the house, Cordwainer House. I don't know how to describe it except that it looked like it didn't belong. It was tall and narrow, crammed between a florist shop and some kind of used bookstore. No signage, no address plate. The only thing that told us we were in the right place was the red glow seeping through the thick curtains. It didn't even look like anyone lived there. Before we could knock, the door opened a few inches on its own. There was a man standing just behind it, tall, dressed in a long black coat, face completely hidden behind a smooth porcelain mask. He didn't speak, just nodded once and held the door wide. We stepped in, and right away it felt different. No decorations, no streamers or pumpkins, no cheesy fake cobwebs, just this heavy stillness in the air, like we'd walked into something waiting for us. The lights were low, and every person in the house wore a mask. Some were wood, some porcelain like the man at the door. A few had long beaks or full animal faces. One woman brushed past me in a fox mask, and I swear I heard something whispering from inside it. Nobody else was unmasked. Just me and Micah. He was grinning like a kid. "Come on," he said, slipping his mask under his arm. "Let's find out what this really is." We walked through the house together at first. The first floor was crowded but quiet. People didn't talk much. They just floated from room to room, exchanging these little carved tokens. Some looked like bones, others like twisted bits of wood. No one acknowledged us directly, but they didn't ignore us either. It was like we were being observed. Micah drifted toward the back, laughing with someone in a deer mask. I followed him, but as soon as he passed under this archway into the next room, I lost sight of him. I blinked. Gone. I called his name. No answer. The music, if you could call it that, was this slow, pulsing beat. Not from any speaker. It felt like it was inside the walls, maybe even inside me. It didn't get louder or change, but I couldn't tune it out. I pushed through the crowd. Still nothing. No one looked familiar. I checked every room on the first floor. No Micah. So I went upstairs. The second floor was colder, darker. The lights were just flickering bulbs behind red cloth, casting shadows that moved even when I didn't. The people here were sitting in chairs, robed, facing different directions like they were in the middle of some silent performance. Old box televisions flickered on the walls, showing nothing but static. But in that static, I kept thinking I saw movement. Eyes. Faces. I said Micah's name again. Still nothing. A man with a mirrored mask turned to look at me. I stared into the glass and saw nothing behind it. Not a face. Not even my own reflection. Just blankness. He stood, walked past me, and was gone. I kept moving. The third floor was nearly empty. The hallway was narrow, the walls lined with what looked like soot or ash. Every door was cracked just enough to see inside. One room had a dozen masks hanging in a circle on hooks, all turned inward like they were watching something in the center. Another room had a long table covered in shattered wine glasses, not a drop of wine anywhere. I whispered, "Micah?" But it didn't even feel like my voice belonged anymore. That's when things shifted. Fog started pouring into the hallway. It didn't roll in from a machine. It just appeared, curling around my feet, creeping up the walls. The air got thicker. I turned to go back down, but the staircase wasn't there anymore. Just another stretch of hallway that hadn't been there before. I retraced my steps, but the doors had all changed. Some disappeared entirely. Others were now boarded shut. I felt like I was walking in circles even though I never turned. Eventually, I found the staircase, but it wasn't the one I came up. It took me down to the first floor again, but things weren't the same. The people were gone. The masks were still there, scattered on the floor or hanging from chairs, but the crowd had vanished. The bar in the corner still had someone behind it, a woman in a feathered mask. I walked over, trying to keep it together. I asked if she'd seen someone. Gray hoodie, glasses, about 6 feet tall. She tilted her head like a bird and said quietly, "Not anymore." Then she turned her back. I tried to leave. The man at the door was still there, same mask, same coat. I told him my cousin was missing, that he was still inside. He tilted his head. "There's no one else in there," he said. Not in a cruel way, just matter of fact. I pushed past him, grabbed the door, and stepped out. The street was silent. The air had gone still. I turned back to the house, and it was different. No light, no red curtains, no music. Just a dead, empty building. No sign of a party. No sound at all. It was like someone had pulled a curtain over it. I ran down the sidewalk, pulled out my phone. No service. I dialed anyway. Somehow, the call went through. When the police arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom. No guests. No decorations. No sign of a party ever happening. Just dust, cobwebs, and on the floor in one of the back rooms, Micah's phone, cracked, still playing that slow, pulsing beat on a loop. The case went nowhere. No sign of him on security footage. No clues. No forced entry. Just nothing. I stayed in Salem for 2 more days, checking back every few hours, asking people on the street, at shops, the local precinct. Nobody had heard of Cordwainer House. Not recently, not ever. One realtor looked confused when I mentioned the address. He said there wasn't a house there, just a lot that had been empty since the late 90s. I pulled up old maps. Some had the house marked, others didn't. It would appear for a few decades, then vanish again. The place was like a ghost itself. Weeks passed. I found the girl Micah said invited him. Tracked her through some messaging app. Her screen name was a weird mash of letters. Not even pronounceable, no picture. Just a single thread of messages where she mentioned the party. I replied, asked questions. She answered one, don't follow it. Then her account vanished. Another year went by. October again. I drove back to the street. Same time, same place. No Cordwainer House. Just a cracked parking lot between 2 shops. I got out of the car, walked across the lot. There, in the middle of the asphalt, was something, a mask. Wooden. Smooth, heavy, like it hadn't aged a day. I flipped it over. Carved inside were 3 letters, MDK Micah's initials, and next to it, a small triangle.